On the 22nd of January 1901, inside of Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, Queen Victoria, the iconic ruler of the UK and Britain, died inside of her bedchambers. Her bedroom, despite being small, was filled with mourning members of her family, many who were weeping heavily, and there were many people inside of this room who would one day play a role in the outbreak of the First World War. But Victoria's family believed that she would never die, and they thought she would live forever, and they did not take her final illness well. Victoria herself was a woman who had a deep affinity with death and had remained in mourning for her husband, Prince Albert, for decades, following his early and shocking death. But the British public also had not known anything different, as Victoria had ruled for almost 64 years, and at the time this was longer than any other monarch in British and English history. But secretly, as the doctor made preparations for her body after her death, and they prepared to place this in the coffin, he and one of the Queen's dressers would sneakily carry out the final wishes of Victoria, and they had a number of items placed inside of her coffin. Many of these would have caused great offence inside the royal family, but this was Victoria's final wish. But what was inside the coffin of Queen Victoria? And these items are still there today, alongside the remains of the Queen in the royal mausoleum in Frogmore. Queen Victoria's death took many people by surprise, but it was clear to the royal doctors that the Queen in the year 1900 was rather ill, and that she was actually suffering. She had a number of rough months following a number of close deaths, and she went to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, and whilst here she was pushed around in a wheelchair and struggled to see as well. She passed away at 6:30 in the evening on the 22nd of January 1901 at the age of 81. With her were many members of her family, including her children and successor, Edward VII, along with the Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. After she passed, her favourite pet, her dog, was placed upon her deathbed, and then instructions for her funeral were dug out and the mourning period began. But there was a lot of chaos, as no one had any experience in planning a royal funeral, and with this there was a lot of arguing between the Lord Chamberlain and other members of the family. Victoria had stated that for her funeral she wanted a military ceremony befitting the daughter of a soldier, and as she was the head of the armed forces, she wanted a huge military presence. She also indicated that she wanted people to wear white instead of black, but a number of calamitous problems then arose. The first of which is the most laughable, was that when the royal undertakers were summoned from London to the Isle of Wight to prepare her body, and then to collect it and bring it back to the English mainland. But they actually forgot the very coffin that Victoria had made years or decades before, and a local craftsman was then ordered to create the coffin that the Queen would be buried in. Queen Victoria had, though, made a number of secret requests to her doctor and close friend Dr. Reed, who she knew would be the one who prepared her body inside of the coffin, and she also informed one of her dressers to help in this. The pair had been given a number of specific instructions as to items that needed to be placed inside of her coffin, and some of these items would have caused a significant degree of offence to the royal family. The first request was made by Victoria that she wanted a plaster mould and cast of her late husband, Prince Albert's hands, to be put inside of the coffin. Albert died in 1861 when he was 42 years old, and the Queen never recovered from his loss. But she wanted his hands to be with her inside of the coffin until the end of time. Dr. Reed also placed one of Albert's dressing gowns inside of the coffin, and this was a garment that her husband wore to bed often, and these were insisted upon by Victoria, and they were a romantic gesture linking the Queen to her deceased love. These were both rather normal items for a woman to be buried with, and she also asked for her wedding ring to be placed inside of the coffin, and this was then placed on her ring finger. But also, Victoria was dressed with her lace wedding veil over her face, and she wanted this as she had kept this from her wedding day, and she wanted her white veil to symbolise that she was reunited with the love of her life, and this was seen as a release from the mourning and grief that she had been plunged into for decades. The veil was said to have been the end of her sadness, but many other pieces of jewellery and jewels were placed on her body, and she wanted as much jewellery on her body as possible. A ring was placed on every one of her fingers, her neck was covered in necklaces, and she had a lot of bracelets on her wrists. Victoria also stated she wanted a cape that her dead daughter Alice had made for her husband when she was young, and Victoria was very close to Alice, who had died in 1878. She was the first of Victoria's children to die, and this broke Victoria's heart. She also asked for a small bouquet of Scottish heather to be placed inside of her coffin, to remind her of the times in the Scottish Highlands in Balmoral. However, many of the requests made by Victoria would have caused a huge amount of upset to members of the royal family. You see, throughout her reign following the death of Prince Albert, Victoria grew close with a servant who was Scottish. He was called John Brown, and many historians have investigated their relationship, and it's believed that the pair did love each other. And Brown was a no-nonsense man who would not hide from telling the Queen something she would not like. And he was one of only a few select people who the Queen would listen to, and he served as the master of her horse, and the pair went on a lot of walks together. He even saved her from serious injury during a carriage accident, and many believe that Victoria did love Brown. Some have even claimed that the pair may have got married, but this hasn't been confirmed. They were very close, but John Brown was not the most popular with the children of Victoria, and was said to have been uncouth and too firm, but Victoria loved this about him. And after Victoria's death, Edward VII, her successor, even removed many of the memorials Victoria made to John Brown following his death. Victoria, in secret, had told her doctor that inside of her coffin she wanted placed was a lock of John Brown's hair that she had secretly kept for decades, and this was passed to the doctor, and he did this. She wanted part of her close companion with her in death, and she then also demanded a picture of Brown to be placed inside of the coffin. However, the most scandalous request that Victoria, for some reason, had the wedding rings of John Brown's mother, and she wanted this to be placed in her coffin, and this was one of the rings placed on her finger. The significance of this is that John Brown's mother may have passed the wedding rings on to Brown for him to give to a woman who would take his hand in marriage. So did Brown give the rings to the Queen with the intention of marrying her? A priest on his deathbed in Scotland claimed that he even married Queen Victoria to John Brown, but this has been disputed. But Victoria wanted to be buried with this ring. It was not a ring made of jewels like the Empress of India could have had. It was a simple ring, a ring made cheaply, but it had a huge amount of significance for Victoria. Victoria wrote about Brown's death saying, "Brown was the best, truest heart that ever beat," and she would also write that he had no thought but for me, my welfare, my comfort, my safety, my happiness, courageous, unselfish, totally disinterested, discreet to the highest degree, speaking the truth fearlessly, and telling me what he thought and considered to be just and right. Without flattery and without saying what would be pleasing if he did not think it right. The comfort of my daily life is gone, the void is terrible, the loss is irreparable. If the royal family would have found out about Dr. Reed placing this ring on her finger, they would have been furious, as they brought into question the idea of Victoria marrying Brown and casting Prince Albert in a different light. But Dr. Reed and the dresser continued to work on her body, and they then prepared her remains and placed the lid of the coffin on. Inside of the coffin were many of the Queen's most treasured items, and those who related to many of her most treasured people, including her husband, children, and possible love. Victoria's funeral was one which did not go ahead without incident, as there were a number of calamitous mistakes, including the funeral carriage even bolting off at one point, and it was then pulled by sailors. But inside of the coffin, the doctor and dresser did well, adhering to her wishes despite the chaos that was emerging outside, and they tastefully recognised what the Queen wanted, as opposed to her grandson, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who cast a death mask of her face against her wishes. These items still remain inside of Queen Victoria's coffin today. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.